Okay, this is a little video to get you up and running on using Rhino for a bit of architectural modeling. So we're just going to dive right into some things here, and really this is just an introduction just to get you rolling, okay? So first things first, inside of Rhino there's a few things that you might want to turn on if you're opening it for the first time. Typically I'll work with grid snap on or off. That's essentially going to move my cursor by placements on the grid. I typically keep O snaps running. Those are going to be things like snapping lines and edges of objects to end, near, point, mid, center, perpendicular, and tangent. As you're working, you'll figure out exactly which things you want to work with, but I do keep O snaps running. The next one is the gumball. The gumball is essentially your direct motion control of any objects that you're starting to build in Rhino. And we'll point the gumball out as we start moving along with things, okay? So typically I keep my quad viewport up, and I will decrease or increase the size of the viewport simply by dragging that around. As you get comfortable with the workflow, you will continue to sort of figure out what works best for you. So one of the scariest things about any 3D program or learning any 3D program is starting with a blank screen. So one of my recommendations is starting off with a sketch that you've done analog style and brought into the computer through whatever method. So bringing that in as a backdrop is called the picture frame command. So I'm going to type in picture frame and enter, and that's going to bring up a browser for a bitmap. And I'm just going to use this really terrible napkin sketch that I've done. Open. And I'm going to start it roughly at the origin and size that up. And you know what? Already I realized I've done something wrong. That's kind of fun. Let's delete this guy. Because one of the first things I really need to do before I even start thinking about sketching is establishing my units inside of Rhino. So let's get rid of the picture frame. That was just selecting it, hitting delete. And let's come back down here to my units. So right now, by default, Rhino is going to be set to millimeters. So right click on that and go to unit setting, and let's set this to something we might be more familiar with for architecture, which is going to be feet and inches, and say OK. And this is going to ask model units change from millimeter to foot, scale model by this amount, which is the number of millimeters in a foot. Right now we're going to say no. I actually don't want to change the size of anything. I just want to change the display units. Alright, so now that we're in feet and inches, let's do that exact same thing again with picture frame. And then we'll open that up. And I'm simply left-clicking to start an edge and left-clicking to stop. Now, the thing about this picture right now as a background image is it really doesn't have any scale. So we definitely need to be adding that as we go along. So to do that, I'm simply going to start with a polyline. And I'm going to go close to a corner. I'm going to turn on ortho because I know I want that to be a straight line in the background here. And I'm going to make this back edge of my design 50 feet long. And I'm going to left click to enter that as a line. And then enter to accept that as a line. And now what's really bizarre, this is like a ridiculous coincidence. I actually scaled that arbitrarily to be 50 feet. I'm going to double check that really quick because that is like the craziest thing ever. Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, well let's assume that that line, I'm going to delete that because we actually want to go through this command correctly. Let's go polyline again. I'm going to go back corner, and let's assume that back edge is actually 70 feet. There we go. That's going to be a better line to work with so we can actually demonstrate scaling the picture frame. Try that one more time here. If you haven't figured out yet, I am fairly new to Rhino. Used it quite a bit several years ago, but I'm just now sort of getting into it. So there was a left click on the corner here. I typed in 70 feet. That locks my distance to 70 feet no matter where I point my cursor. I'm going to left click right here to select that as the direction for the line, and then hit enter to accept that line length. Now, in terms of navigation, so I'm in this top viewport right now. I'm using my wheel to zoom in and out, and I'm using the right button on my mouse to pan. If I go to a perspective view, I still have the wheel to zoom in and out, but the right mouse is going to orbit. So in order to pan inside of the perspective view, I'm going to shift and right mouse button to pan around. You will see me on a regular basis. I'm very used to using the wheel to pan. When I'm in the perspective view, if I click the wheel, I'm going to get this shortcut menu. When you see that pop up, you can pretty much assume that that was an oops on my part. Okay, so let's go back to scaling this picture frame. I want this back edge of the wall to actually be 70 feet long. So the process to do that is simply the scale command. So in my command prompt right here, always refer back to that. That's going to walk you step by step through what you need to be doing next. So Rhino is asking me select objects to scale, which is my picture frame. Press enter when done. So enter. The next thing is I need to select my base point. So to scale this correctly, I'm going to use this location as my base point right here, the end of that line. So next, scale factor or first reference point. So this would be my first reference point. So I'm going to click right here, which is what my line currently is. And now I'm going to go to the end point of my line, what I want that line to be. So now I know this back wall is 70 feet. Let's go ahead and delete that line. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to expand this top view window just a bit. And I'm going to trace just a portion of the outer edge of this wall. And we'll look at converting polyline into some geometry that we can start to use for architecture. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and activate my polyline command, and I'm just going to draw this. And I know this first line is 70 feet long, so I'm going to use that as a dimension again, 70 feet to that corner. And then I'm going to come back this direction. I'm just kind of using, my napkin sketch here was not precise at all. So what I'm doing is I'm looking down right here at my actual dimensions. I'm going to lock in some dimensions that I know are close. So I'm reading this as moving in the Y direction, 45 feet, roughly. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in and accept that as an exact dimension. Okay, and left click. And then I'm going to come in towards the entryway. Again, that's close to 25 feet. So I'm going to go ahead and type in 25 feet as my dimension. And left click to accept that. Coming out about 5 feet. And then across to this front entry. Looks like I've got that drawn in, roughly about 25 feet as well. So we'll type in 25 feet one more time. And accept that. And then I'm going to enter to create that line. Okay, so the next thing that I need to do with this line is I need to give it a little bit of thickness. So that's going to be the offset command. So it's asking me for a couple of things. Select the curve. This polyline, once it's created, is called a curve in the program. I know it's not curved. It's called a curve. It's all right. You can do it. So once I've selected the curve, it's asking for a direction to offset, either inside or outside. And it's also giving me the option to set the distance. So if I wanted something other than 1 foot, which is the default, I can click distance here, and I can type in 5 feet. And now that offset is going to be 5 feet. But in fact, 1 foot seems right about right. So I'm going to go ahead and accept that as a dimension and offset that to the inside. Now, this hasn't made a surface yet. I actually don't have closure on these end lines here and here. And I need to be able to do that to start turning this into some solid geometry. But before we do that, let's look a little bit at some layers so I can begin to see things a little bit clearer. It's a little bit difficult to see some of the lines in places. So I'm already at that point where I'm going to want to turn some layers on and off. So if you go to our layer tool right now, I have everything on the default layer that comes in. And what I want to be able to do is make a couple of layers. So let's call this first layer a wall. And let's set that to the active layer simply by clicking that checkbox. I can turn off my default layer, and you can see everything is getting turned off right now. So what I want to do is I'm going to select using the right lasso. So that's only going to select the things that are within the lasso, those 2 curves. Then I'm going to right click on my layer and say change object layer. So that's essentially going to take whatever that geometry is and put it on my active layer. Now if I turn off the default layer, picture plane or the picture frame is gone, and I'm simply left with those curves that I created. Now I can really easily see to draw in the end edges. So there's polyline 1 and enter. Zoom in on this one right here. Put that line in the end. And so now I've formed what is called a closed loop. So this is ready to become a surface. So the command for that, I'm simply going to left lasso this time. So a left lasso, you're going to see, shows up as a dashed line. And that is going to select everything that touches the lasso, rather than simply everything that's inside of the lasso. So I've got all of my curves selected, and I'm going to come across to a tool called Planar Surface. Okay, and so what that's done is that has created a surface inside of all of those lines. Okay, so that is an active surface now. Now, in your default viewports, the default is going to be set to wireframe, so it might be a little bit difficult to see that that's created a surface. So setting that perspective to a shaded view is going to help you see what surfaces you have created. So my next step is I want to actually create something three-dimensional out of this, not just a two-dimensional plane. So I'm going to run the command extrude surface. And this is going to ask me for a surface to extrude. And I'm going to select that surface, press enter. And now I can move my mouse or my cursor here to select a direction. And then I can type in a distance, an extrusion distance. So for this, I'm going to move in the up direction, and let's go 14 feet to set the height of those walls. Now if you'll notice, I have sort of a solid geometry here on the bottom, and I have open geometry here on the top. So there's a really quick command to resolve that, and that's called cap. So I'm just going to, again, select all my geometry here, type in cap, C-A-P, and that will fill that top edge. So now I've got something that's starting to look like some geometry that relates to the building design. So two more quick things to run through, and that is establishing different working planes and Boolean objects. And that's going to get you sort of really the basic tools that you need to really start putting some things together quickly in Rhino. So setting construction planes is the second tab over from the standard tab. And this is a really useful feature, and this is something you're going to reference often as you're doing work in 3D. So for this, if I want to create an opening here on this wall that represents the entry to my design, the most useful tool that I've found so far in terms of setting construction plane is this tool right here, Set C-Plane to Surface. So if I look at this perspective view, right now the perspective view is working specifically with the top construction plane. So that's the active construction plane right now. If I'm in my perspective view and I'm drawing something, it is drawing on what is called the top view construction plane. Okay, so let's delete that. At any point in time, I can change that to world view back, right, left, or side. So if I would change that to the back, you're actually going to see it tilt that construction plane up. So now if I go back to drawing a polyline, rather than drawing that polyline in plan view, it's drawing it in elevation view, which is handy, but it's not necessarily drawing it exactly where I want it. So I'm going to delete that, and let's reset it back to its default, which is top. If I want to draw something directly on this surface, I can begin to use this Set Construction Plane to Surface. Activate that, select Surface to Orient Plane to. I'm going to select that surface, and then I can set a new origin if I'm going to type in specific dimensions and locations. Typically though, I would just assume accept the defaults, so I'm going to hit enter again, and now my construction plane, it's going to ask me for one more x-axis direction, or press enter to accept the default. So I'm going to again accept the defaults, and now you can see it's put a construction plane directly on that surface. So given that, I can now come in and I can use that construction plane to begin to draw whatever type of opening I might want on my surface. Let's go ahead and do that to close off that geometry. It's a squirrely shaped door, but that's okay. So I've got that construction plane or not that construction plane, but that curve selected now. And you can see it is a curve that is a closed loop. And once I select it, it is going to turn on the gumball for me. So the gumball is right here. If that is not active, I won't see it. If I turn gumball on, it's going to give me that. And what the gumball essentially allows me to do is move on any plane or rotate or scale. So I'm just going to pull that away from that construction plane just a bit. Okay, because what I want to do with this is I want to set that up to do a subtraction off of this surface. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to, again, select that curve. I'm going to make it a solid object next. So that would be the planar surface tool again, planar surface right there. So now that is not only a curve, that's now a surface. And now I can use my extrude again. And I can use the gumball to do an extrusion as well. My personal preference is to just go ahead and do this method though. I just feel like it's a little bit more in control for me. I'm going to cap that off. And now I can use this object to Boolean through the wall. Let's actually make sure it's on each side of the wall. So you can see this object right now is moving through that wall. Pan that around in this view. And so to subtract one from the other, delete the original geometry that made my solid object there. I can select my Boolean difference function, which is right here, Boolean difference. It's going to say select polysurfaces to subtract from. So this is my subtractor, which is going to be that polysurface, and then enter. And now it's going to ask for the subtract E, or the surface to subtract with, which would be this object that I made the extrusion. Now when I hit enter, I have a really squirrely shaped door opening to trip over and cause lawsuits, right? So that's not so good, but that gets you the idea of how I can start making windows, doors, those types of things very quickly around the outer edge of my wall to represent my geometry. Now the same thing as I'm going up a level, if I wanted to start working on a roof object for this, I would probably start by coming in set C-plane surface, selecting that top edge, and hitting enter, and enter to accept my defaults. And now my construction plane has moved up to that top surface. Now remember, as you're drawing, my in snaps, my O snaps, things like that, endpoint, midpoints, will override working in that construction plane. So be careful as you're drawing. So for instance, if I have my polyline tool and I start drawing here, if I get close to this location, it's actually going to bend that line down. So pay very close attention to how you're drawing and what surface you're drawing on to make sure you're being consistent in terms of where and how you're placing those lines. And that's simply a matter of remembering that you're working in 3D. So that's essentially going to give you the things that you need to get started in Rhino. We'll have a few more tips and tricks coming up soon in terms of layers, materials, and outputting to two-dimensional drawings.